Now, the idea of moving to a new IFB church, for someone that currently goes to an old IFB church or someone that doesn't really have a good church in your area and they decide to move to a new IFB church, right? Whether that's Steadfast or Faithful Word or Sure Foundation, there's many great new IFB churches out there. And perhaps a question that kind of comes up, especially for people kind of looking on the outside. Maybe they're not exactly saved, maybe they're not Christian, but they're just wondering, like, why would someone, move across the country? Why would they move to a different city or even to a different state just to go to a specific church? Like, what's so special about these specific churches? And really, there's kind of two ways to look at that. You can look at it from where their current perspective is, which is like they don't really have a good church here. It's not a decent option. All these pastors are repenting of your sins, and so it's like they have to move just to even find a church where they can get plugged into and be a part of that ministry. Or another thing too is that they look at what the church has and has positive things that would compel them to move. For example, they have family integrated services so that the kids are going to be watched by their parents. They're not going to be, no one's going to pressure them and say like, oh, you should put them in the nursery or anything like that. They're going to allow the parents to be with their kids, right? To protect them, right? And, obviously the pastors are going to preach more correct doctrine. They're going to preach about how the rapture is after the tribulation. They're going to preach about the fact that the Jews are not God's chosen people and things of that sort, right? So more correct doctrine, more correct beliefs. Obviously, when there's more correct beliefs, there's going to be better fellowship as well. Also, the fact that many of these old IP churches, even if they are saved, the problem is that they oftentimes will charge for specific things. Like they might say like, oh, to come to this conference, you have to pay however many, amount of dollars or what have you, when Jesus tells us to not make, the Father's house a house of merchandise. And so in the new IP, we make sure everything's free. If you want to go to a missions trip, if you want to go to a conference, they don't charge for any of those things. They're not going to charge you just because, you show up to a conference or something to that effect. They will never charge you for anything, which is great. Now, for me personally, right, because at the end of the day, you might, people might ask the question of like, what's like the number one reason for why you would move to a new IP church? And, you're going to get maybe a few different answers. But for me personally, the number one reason for why I want to move to a new IP church, why I'm going to do that, Lord willing, in August, right, once, me and Selena get married and we end up going on our honeymoon and so on, like, what's like my personal number one reason? And I would say my number one reason for why I want to move to a new IP church, specifically Steadfast, is because of the soul winning. In terms of the effectiveness of the soul winning, the thoroughness of the soul winning, the fact that there's so many people there that are extremely zealous, they love the Lord, they love soul winning, and they're doing all kinds of missions trip where they do a lot of great soul winning as well, going to very receptive countries, and that they produce a lot of great results. They're getting, last year they got 14,000 people saved, and that's the kind of church I want to get plugged into. So really, it's just the soul winning for me personally, like the number one thing for why.